Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We have a lot to discuss this week. We're going to start with some. We're going to tell you about our first of all our live podcast, our event that is coming up. We're going to get into that. Some other kind of end of the year housekeeping things. But let me, we've been talking about this the last couple episodes. Let me give you the details now. So as I said last week, we are doing our live podcast, our first live podcast. You can come see Kate and I do a live edition of the podcast. It's on January 15th in Washington, D.C. The tickets are on sale now. Tickets are $75 a piece if you're not a member. They're $50 if you are a member. If you're a member, you should have gotten an email, I believe, Tuesday night. We're recording this on Wednesday, December the 18th. So that would have been last night would be Tuesday, December 17th. Again, in your email, that's how you can get the discount for being a member. If you're not a member, go to our website, talkingpointsmemo.com. You'll see stuff up. You'll see stuff up there that'll give you a link to go and purchase a ticket. If you are an inside member, tickets are free. So that's all the kind of the housekeeping details. Again, come join us. It'll be a lot of fun. As I said, we're doing the episode live. After that, we're going to have a Q&A session, then a bar. Every attendee gets a coupon for one free drink, cocktail, beer, whatever it is you want. So we're going to have a lot of fun. So I really hope you can join us on January 15th in Washington, D.C. The other thing is, this is actually the last regularly scheduled podcast of this calendar year. We are going to have one more episode that will be released this year. That one is where we're announcing the winners of the Golden Duke Awards for this year. And I believe that one's going to come out something like December 30th, maybe 31st, something like that, end of the year, when we always announce Golden Dukes winners. If you're not familiar with the Golden Dukes, that is our annual, and my God, I think this is the 17th annual edition of the Golden Dukes, where basically it is our awards show for the best scandals and misbehavior and corruption and all that kind of stuff. So it's always a lot of fun. As I said, that edition of the podcast comes out basically the end of the calendar year, but this is the last one where we're going to do the, traditional Josh and Kate show, for lack of a better word. So those are all the details. Like I said, really hope you come join us on January 15th. And what we're going to, well, let me just get into it with Kate here. People are we had this thing with AOC and Jerry Connolly, representative from Virginia. What's the story with that? Introduce us to what happened here.
Yeah, this is part of what I would call Kate Deflategate, if you will, which is my name for the most deflated I've felt since the election, I have to say. That'll be kind of a theme throughout this episode. But with this specifically, this was really cherry on top. We spoke, I think, a couple episodes ago about how some of the relatively younger movers and shakers of the party were agitating for leadership on the most powerful committees. Now, of course, this is leadership with an asterisk because Republicans are in charge. So, agitating to be kind of the top Democratic messenger on these big committees. And Raskin did that by doing a kind of aggressive bid for judiciary and knocking Jerry Nadler kind of out of contention. And then AOC kind of raised her hand to take his spot on oversight. And at first, everyone was like, cool, great. You'll get some leaders, you'll get some headlines about generational leadership change. You'll give, totally deflated lefties like something to be excited about. And then it came out that Nancy Pelosi was leading the whip operation against AOC, um, on behalf of Jerry Connolly, who is a 74-year-old, spring chicken who just announced he has a pretty serious cancer diagnosis, and who has been passed over for this role twice before. And so AOC lost the steering committee vote, which is this kind of like mysterious Byzantine cross section, or supposed to be kind of a cross section of the caucus, but kind of heavy on veterans. Um, and after she lost it, she said, "Okay, I'm going to take it to the full caucus." And the rationale there is pretty obvious, right? Like, if this is in any way, this committee is kind of stacked towards the old heads, she's going to do better with a greater
Mhm.
cross section. But she
She
lost
didn't.
in the caucus, like, pretty handily. She got something 84, 85 votes, which the Progressive Caucus is bigger than that, which had endorsed her, and then you got the smaller pockets of like the Hispanic caucus and various other kind of ones that orbit on the left of the party. So he won really handily. She has dealt
Like
with it.
130 something to
Right,
80, something like
exactly.
that. So not quite 2-1, but not close.
Right, not close. Part of what's going on here, I think, is that people like Connolly a lot within the caucus. He's seen as, when he's been on this committee, he's been passed over, and instead of kind of pouting about it, he's really like thrown himself into the work, that he's been a workhorse kind of thing.
Yep,
Um
yep.
some people felt like, well, it's his turn, he deserved it. And obviously the seniority mentality is still really pervasive within the caucus, and AOC is new and young, and he's been here for a billion years kind of thing. But, you know, the headlines kind of suck. And there's this one quote from uh, Don Bayer that's like, Jerry's 74, but he's a young 74. And you're just like, oh my God. And I don't know Connolly very well. I haven't interacted with him in any meaningful way. And maybe he is good, but you get the sense that if he's in his eighth term, if he could communicate anywhere near the way that AOC can, we'd have heard a bit more about him up till this point. I mean, I think it's similar to, like, no one would say, I think, that Nadler did a bad job as head of the Judiciary Committee, and he was kind of overseeing it during some important and turbulent times. But you would never say either that he's an electric politician, right? That he's the kind of a
Yeah,
messaging
he's
genius.
Jerry Nadler, who for many years was my representative, who I interviewed for TPM once ages ago, has never been a dynamic politician. That's to put it mildly. And in a different era, that's not, being on camera is not everything. And in a different era, it was less of a thing than it is now. I don't know a great deal about Connolly either. Know a bit about him. I think it is worth sort of holding a space in our minds for the fact that this isn't like a bad guy or some sort of like, kind of you know, comatose, ancient dude or whatever. But that's sort of not the point. He's clearly not AOC, and this was a I would. This is just my speculation. I didn't know he had been passed over um, uh, twice before. I would imagine it does seem like, well, he's clearly well liked. That this wouldn't have happened if he were not well liked, although I don't think that's the whole story, maybe not even the main story. But if that is true, and if he has been passed over a couple times, and if he has cancer. I'm sure some of the people who like him a lot kind of figured, like, he really wants this. Let's not end on this note. Having said that, I think that we have seen, and there is a lot of feeling among Democrats for very understandable reasons, that it's not personal. You know, this is a whole national party. And I do think we have seen other cases where decisions get made because of personal relationships within a workplace. And at some level, these are personal relationships within a workplace up there. And those decisions get made on that basis. And if you kind of zoom in, those are understandable decisions, but that's not everything that's going on. It's a whole national party. There's a whole thing, and I was surprised by this, honestly. I was When I saw the steering committee thing, I was a little surprised by that, but I wasn't terribly surprised because, as you said, it's the steering committee. It's the senior people, right? It's not it's not the whole caucus, and so I was surprised by it, and I I'm curious what you're picking up on this, Kate, but I have to imagine that this was not just, or maybe even mainly, about Conley and, like, oh, it's his turn and stuff like that. I think there's a substantial number of people in the caucus who don't want to be running in 2 years under brand AOC, and that has to be a big part of this.
Yeah, so we know that Connolly made a big part of his pitch how many Republicans were saying that they wanted AOC to be ranking member and that it would help
Right.
attack her. And I just think if that was the rationale, I am so even more deeply worried about this than I was, because it is classic Democratic living in a defensive crouch, playing 3D chess by, like, trying to determine how the right will hit and attack them and what kind of coverage it'll get on Fox News. I mean, the fact that Fox News probably won't run a propaganda campaign against Jerry Connolly is not a boon to his candidacy. That means that they think, and we can use a instead of a hypothetical, the reason they didn't have to run PR campaigns against Jerry Nadler was not a good thing. That meant that he was so, I'm sorry, but useless and kind of powerless in terms of messaging and effectiveness, that they didn't bother. The reason that they would go wall to wall on AOC, including all the stuff we already know, right? That a woman of color is scary and blah, 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 is because she's really effective. And they would have to do that to try to fight back against her power. So this idea that you're going to take your most talented communicator in your party and push her onto the back bench because you're afraid of what the right's going to do about it, I think is so completely misguided. Because A, they're going to tie you to AOC anyway. Whether or not she's in a position of prominence, they're going to find her tweets, or, unless she's completely silenced, they're going to find some way to
Well,
make her the face.
Exactly. It's not like we haven't heard from her over the last 6 years because she wasn't a chairman or ranking member. I
Right.
mean, it's so. I mean, my take is a little different on this, but I come down globally in the same place. Right now, I would, if there was, should AOC be speaker? No, I wouldn't want. I like speaker, speaker designate for the, head of the Democratic caucus. I like Hakeem Jeffries for that. I'm not saying, there's a very long future for AOC, but Hakeem Jeffries is speaker. Um, Jamie Raskin is head of the Judiciary Committee. So you've got a lot of key spots, and AOC should be in one of those key spots, right? And but look, I do think um, she is an extremely effective communicator. She is beloved by the great majority of engaged Democrats. Um, that doesn't mean she's beloved by everyone in the country, right? And I do think some of this is there are people in more marginal districts who are a little leery about that. So I think there's some both things being true, but again, having that team, having her in a high profile spot, that made absolute sense. And I was surprised by the fact that it was not even close. I will say this too. One thing that came out that runs, and I'm not, I want to be clear here. I'm not making some strong argument, oh, AOC's toxic in swing districts. I don't think that's true. I'm just saying that she's not the same person in strong democratic districts as she is in swing districts. This is obvious, right? This is just in the nature of politics. One thing that came out in all those uh focus groups towards the end of the election and after the election, where you have kind of young men or just kind of people who don't follow politics very closely and who were uncertain, and who voted for Trump. A lot of examples from those focus groups where someone says, "Yeah, but I like Trump and AOC." Like, okay, like, whoa, okay, and why? Because they're anti-establishment. They're not part of the system. They're not part of the team. All that kind of stuff. So even that there's some truth to that kind of swing district kind of thing, but there's a whole counter thing of a lot of people who are swing voters like her. E- so it doesn't it this was a mistake, and just because we hold a space that Jerry Connolly isn't evil, this was a mistake.
I completely agree. I was going to say the same thing, that she has demonstrated some crossover appeal with these people who
Absolutely.
are ideologically kind of all over the map. And I think, particularly, I keep going back to this point that what is the next 2 years for, right? Democrats have nearly no power. They're as powerless as they can be. So it has got to be the time where you try stuff out and you find your sea legs and you figure out the greater narrative arc that, best case scenario, is going to lead you to take back the House in 2026. And I think the easiest on road, which will be the lowest lift for this big, anxious, queasy caucus, is going to be, okay, take all the kind of boring conventional wisdom about economic populism stuff and channel that into, instead of having these big messy fights about, like, do we want kind of a Scandinavian social insurance system or Medicaid for all, like, instead of getting into the weeds, direct all your energies into an eat the rich ethos, right?
Hmm.
You like beat up on CEOs and you find like gruesome examples of corporate price gouging and you hammer those. And who better to kind of stake out that positionality than AOC? I mean, that's her bread and butter. This is why people like her. Her kind of
Yep.
economic populism stuff. It's the same people, same reason people like Bernie, and it's the same people that same reason dumb people like Trump, because they think he's like this too, even though he's obviously
Right.
not if you're paying any
Right.
attention at all. And so it's just, I completely agree with you. It's a huge whiff in every single way, including that it demoralizes the high information people who I know the Democrats don't think they need to court, but based on this election, like, maybe you kind of do have to do some shoring up with your base, and those people like want to die right now, so
You
throw
need to
them a
keep people
bone.
energized. You need to keep people
Yeah.
energized.
And I
Yeah.
just think she
Yeah.
would be a key building block to building this new party, giving it a new gloss, and directing all of its energies into uh, pointing people's attention to the fact that we are in this like scary point of collapse where kind of like rich and powerful people are looting what's left and doing pay for play in Trump's presidency and funding his inauguration, and you've got a cowed press outlet funding the presidential library for the person who's been most hostile to the press of any president ever. I mean, this is like easy stuff, and it is mind-boggling that one of the few decisions Democrats have to make right now, they came down on the side of, no, like, we're going to go with a guy who, to be honest, is going to be more reliably pliant towards leadership than the person who might stir things up and get Democrats' attention and maybe even, God forbid, get them some support.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I mean, one thing on the bad side, one thing on the good side. there is this was not a vote about is AOC becoming head of the Democratic Party. And you can say, well, okay, that's you need to think that through. Maybe this was not. This was putting her. This was making her part of the official team. Giving her one of the high profile positions, while Hakeem Jeffries is the leader of the caucus, while you have Jamie. I mean, what made sense about this to me is that it's just the right mix. You've got people there who speak different languages, and you need all those languages. The one thing that I would say it is the fact of the decision. I know is going to be very demoralizing to a lot of people, and I'm not gonna. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, I'm not arguing that point. The one thing I think we can take a little solace from is she's not going anywhere. Right. This doesn't mean we're not going to be hearing from her. Having being ranking member is not the only way you become a prominent voice. I mean, we'll be able to see it because Jerry Connolly won't be a prominent voice, right? So I can prove it to you that way. So I'm not sure. This is not a binary thing where she's can't do what she's been doing for the last 6 years. But yeah, it is disappointing. I'm curious. I at least don't have a good sense of what exactly made this decision. You can see it one way to see it is people just felt more comfortable with him, less scary somehow, right? Another is seniority is how it works, and that's just he's next, and that's everybody wants to back that thing. The other is that a lot of them were just didn't want to sort of make her more prominent, and um, uh, I'm not sure any of those things are good, but the difference kind of matters in my mind. I would just be curious to find out more. But yeah, it is. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Obviously, we just came out of an election where people feel for you know some pretty decent reasons that allowing people to stay on the job, well into well past retirement age, uh, caused caused some problems for the Democrats. So Democrats, the sort of rank and file Democrats are pretty sensitive to this issue, to put it to put it mildly, right? And we come off. I don't know when this was exactly. What, a year or so ago, when Dianne Feinstein, who was in a very prominent role and clearly very infirm for a long time. Eventually died in office. So this is a sore spot for Democrats, and so yeah, people are a lot of certainly highly engaged Democrats are pretty bummed about this, and you see a lot of people. I see a lot of people saying on just very sarcastic and cynical and dispirited remarks about this. Like, why haven't these people learned any lesson?
I mean,
And it's
and
hard to argue.
we've also just come off an election where the greatest mistake, right, which was Joe Biden running for reelection, went on happened in the first place and was prolonged because the Democrats who could affect that decision had to wrestle with their personal love for Joe Biden and the political realities of the situation. And I mean, who at least is credited with breaking that gridlock is Nancy Pelosi, who
Hmm.
in the process sacrificed her relationship with Joe Biden, which we know is something that she is sad about and will probably never get back. And so that's part of why this is so baffling to me is the best thing about Pelosi is her ruthlessness. She is one of the very few Democrats who just wants to win. And
Mhm,
there
mhm.
is that is in abundance on the Republican side, and Democrats have always lacked it to the same degree. You know,
Yeah,
when it means getting your hands dirty and upsetting people, Democrats get squeamish, and Pelosi historically does not. And so her throwing her weight in behind Connolly here, even if she thinks Connolly will do a good job, who cares? This isn't a job that you have to do well, because you don't really get to do anything except for have press conferences and send strongly worded letters and fight with the chairman. Like, it's
yeah,
all
yeah, yeah,
theater. So why
yeah.
wouldn't you want your best performer in this role?
Well, I think, look, it is pretty clear to me that Nancy Pelosi does not think she is the best performer in this role. It is, maybe she's really tight with Connolly, and I don't know, but it is. I mean, look, I think we've always known she is not part of Team AOC, and there's room for multiple teams. Um, Great legislative leader in general. I My impression though was that there was m- more of a rapprochement between them, or an appreciation that she is a significant part of the future than seems to be the case, right? Um, look, I still think. I mean, the thing with and that was definitely what I was alluding to, that it caused Democrats some problems with how things played out with Joe Biden. I continue to think that the key issue was that there was not people who really were in a position to change that when you could have changed it, which was not in early 2024. It was back in 2022. The president runs the party, and that is just the fact. And I'm not saying in retrospect could things have been done differently. I'm saying the fact that it was overwhelmingly his call, that there's not really anybody in a position, not in a position to kind of make the president feel bad. The president has the power. That was a If he wanted to run, it was always going to be a very difficult thing to change that. Um, this was not like that. There's not, like, you can't stop the Jerry Connolly locomotive, man. It's already left the station. This is, I mean, there's nothing like that at all, right? I mean, this is this. So, but yeah, we're not in. I don't get. I mean, and one thing I don't get is that when you look at the vote result, did Nancy Pelosi even have to lobby? Right? It wasn't a close call. So I don't even know. I don't know quite. I don't know quite what to think.
I mean, and knowing what you said is the only thing we know for sure. Pelosi didn't want AOC to have the job. I mean, some people are doing the ridiculous, like, oh, cattiness, they don't like each other thing that people always do whenever like women have disagreement. And I think that's bullshit. Like, Pelosi is better at putting personal, opinions aside for politics than
Absolutely,
anyone.
absolutely.
B, AOC has towed the party line,
Hmm.
like, she has paid her dues. She has contributed gobs of money to the campaign organs. She was one of the biggest surrogates for Biden and then
Hundred
for
percent.
Harris.
100%.
But I just loop back to it. It all brings me to, then why would Pelosi do this, knowing that this would be the reaction, right? It wasn't really hard to predict that people would be upset about this. And it just keeps bringing me back into this really worrying cul-de-sac, that it's because, like you said, she didn't want people to have to run attached to AOC. And I just find that to be so disturbing, because this is what Democrats always do. Like, this idea that if you just stay under the radar and don't attract right-wing furor, then somehow you'll slip through and you'll win. I mean, we've just had a huge test of that, where the whole Biden ethos was, we're turning the page on Trump. We're not going to talk about him. We're going to get back to level-headed governance, and this fever has passed. I mean, we now know conclusively that is not true. So any forward-looking strategy that relies on this same, like, we're just going to talk about pocketbook issues and not put a toe over the line and make sure we don't anger anyone or give Fox News any fodder to go after us is abundantly ridiculous based on this most recent election, but also the fact that Democrats have tried this before. It does not work. The right wing is not tethered to fact. If you don't give them anything juicy to work with, they'll just make shit up. You know, they'll find like a half phrase somewhere in some bill and pretend that it's the governing ethos of the whole Democratic Party, and you're off to the races. Like, we see them do this routinely when they're out of stuff, right? They'll do a red meat ban or the gas stove panic. Like, they'll fill the void. So the fact that you would avoid any appearance of activeness or energy or passion because you're afraid of the backlash, that is what got us here. Like, genuinely, have you learned nothing? I mean, it's so angering. It's the one small thing you could have done to create the appearance of vitality, and instead, again, I'm sorry to Jerry Connolly, but you picked a septuagenarian with serious cancer. Like, what message do you expect that to send people?
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear, and you're exactly right on the aside from the general meme stereotype about cattiness, Nancy Pelosi at a whole different level doesn't work that way. I think if she thought that if she thought someone she really hated was the one who was going to get the job done, she'd be with that person. The fact that she basically ended Joe Biden's career tells you that. She likes Joe Biden, and I'm sure it broke her heart to see what was happening there, but that didn't matter. And that frankly was one of her greatest moments, right? Because it's not personal. It can't be personal. You have to do what you think is the politically smart thing to do. And again, I think you and I are in a slightly different place on uh, uh, different audiences around the country, and the wariness of some people in swing districts. But she is a key part of the Democratic Party. You can't be saying, oh, we got to keep her under wraps. She's a key part of the current coalition. And again, I come back to that thing. You had a lot of these, very unpolitical, non-trusting, kind of swing voter types who it comes up again and again. They're like, yeah, Trump is going to shake things up, and I like AOC too. Now, in the world of people who kind of are political and follow these things, you hear that and you're like, okay, maybe everyone shouldn't have the right to vote because you don't seem to be paying any attention at all to what's happening, right? And what you're saying is nonsense. But this is the world that we live in, and part of believing in democracy is believing that there are there are things that people from a great distance and not being saturated in politics sometimes see that we who are saturated in politics don't see. And I think as we saw in this election, kind of like, I don't like how the system is running and I want to shake things up, is a powerful thing in our society right now. It's a powerful thing in the world. And what I that sort of wariness about swing districts thing, which has always been a powerful thing in democratic politics, and in some ways rightly so. What you see there is what is really important, I think, for Democrats is there's this thing that people do who don't really have a sophisticated understanding of politics, that they say, okay, we know that there are parts of the country where people who are heavily coded as Democrats, there's no conversation. You're a Democrat. You're a libtard. You're all, that's not whatever. And some people go from that, well, okay, you need to be towards the center. So not huge tax cuts, but medium-sized tax cuts. That linearity shows you don't understand how politics works at all. what you're talking about is you need some people who are not coded traditionally as Democrats, but that doesn't mean they're halfway between on some sort of fully articulated, policy spectrum. It means a lot of that means just being kind of more anti-establishment, right? And she does that. And she succeeds at that. And so again, some of the details I see a little differently, but big picture, this was just dumb. And again, the only way I sort of tell I don't get too bummed about it is that she's still going to be super prominent and a really important voice here. But it it shows you there's some potential problems with a decent chunk of the caucus that sees this a little differently. I don't know, no other way to put it.
Just two more quick points on this. One of which, in terms of the swing district issue, I hear you, but we just had Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Golden and all these other frontliners who
Mhm.
survived. They
Mhm.
all did these big media tours after their win because everyone was like, "Well, you won in Trump land. How do the rest of
Yeah.
us win?" And those people kept saying the same thing over and over, which is why I frankly thought it was kind of useless to have them on these shows, that they ran really local races, that they were really focused on, you know, the lake health of their district and the lobsterman issues, and that they were successfully able to uncouple themselves from the national narrative, which is a hard
Mhm.
thing to
Mhm.
do. But if that's the case, then having AOC in a slightly more senior position than she is now would also be something that those skilled frontliners would be able to decouple themselves from. Even you could even set it up in a way that they could vote against her for, it's a
Mhm.
secret ballot, and then they could say, well, I didn't choose her. She's not my favorite Democrat, whatever. So, there's that piece. And then the other gets into what you were saying about this sense that ideologically weird, non high political information voters are moderate, this like misconception that they are centrist rather than just totally uninformed. Um, Again, we have really solid proof of that because Biden ran an economically progressive administration in to the extent he was able with the margins he was working for. I mean, that was the whole theory of his administration, was that you deliver people populist legislation and then they reward you politically. And we have seen that those two things are completely uncoupled.
Yeah.
So, you know, that also, I mean, it has to be part of the democratic notion going forward that it sucks, but policy is not politics anymore. The chasm between those two things might never have been farther than it is right now. And so there has to be just a real investment in messaging and the marketing side of politics. And this makes me really concerned that those lessons just have not been learned. But, to end on a less grim note, you're right, right? And this is Steny Hoyer told reporters, he said this to her after she lost the vote. You have a gazillion followers, you're not going anywhere. And did some, you're still new, I've lost a lot of races in my day, just hang out
It's
and
true.
kind of wait. So, you're right. I mean, the reason why she's so powerful is because she is able to operate outside the Democratic Party framework solely because of her own talents.
Did he say that to her and then she said that, or did he say that in some sort of public setting? I was
Right. He
curious.
told reporters that's what he had said to her.
Right, right, right. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, ironically, Steny Hoyer is a is a very funny messenger of that message because he waited in Pelosi's shadow until he was over 80, and they both had to retire together. So in some ways, he's not a perfect messenger of that message. I mean, look, he's a very powerful guy and all that kind of stuff. It's I will say though too, even I think I wrote a piece right after the election saying that the sort of the progressive left needs, I mean, a lot of different factions here need to kind of think about what to draw from this. Um, uh, the Bidens and Harrises are getting a lot of incoming on this for very reasonably so. I wrote this piece saying, and I think this is really true, the progressive left has to grapple with the fact that this was an extremely progressive administration in policy terms. Did a lot of stuff. It seems to have mattered absolutely not at all. And to a great extent, no one even noticed the policy stuff. I do think, I'll come back to this point, saying about, people who don't know anything about politics. I think part of what that is, there are people whose only connection to politics, whose only expression of politics is, I don't like how things are working and I want someone who will kind of bust things up. And again, that's the AOC language for a lot of people, even people who are not culturally coded like her at all. Right. So yeah, I mean, there's still some work to do. I think we will have to say here.
Yeah, and we clearly had a lot to say about that because we spent way too much time on it. So
Well, hopefully
now let's
people will forgive us. Yes.
yeah, now let's move on to the great capitulation is what I'm calling it, which we've got a whole bunch of stuff in this bucket. It's ABC being willing to pay, a few million to get out of a lawsuit they almost certainly would have won. This was based on George Stephanopoulos saying that a jury had found Trump liable for raping E. Jean Carroll, which is only not true in the kind of slimmest, most semantic, technical sense that the law that he was found liable for in New York just differentiates its kind of technical definition of rape by, whether he raped her with his penis or with his fingers. So even the judge in the case added a little note saying, it's not technically rape, but that is just kind of a fluke of the law by the common understanding that is what he has been found to have done here.
And even the judge, and this is what made this, to my mind, not a close legal case, is the actual judge who oversaw the case said officially, by the common sense, by how we use this word in the English language, he raped her. He was found to have raped her.
Right.
Again, the way that defamation law works, if someone with the standing on these facts, as the judge, says that what you said was actually accurate, the idea that you would lose a defamation case in clear public figure territory is kind of absurd, especially when, as you say, that no one in this day and age would say that I would say that it has to be intercourse to be rape. That's just not, we don't, that's not the language we work in these days. So it is pretty crazy in
Yeah,
legal
it's
terms.
absurd. And it's left people kind of reaching for, is there something we're not thinking of here? Were they afraid that something embarrassing for George Stephanopoulos would come out during discovery? And I just, we might never know the full extent of it, but it seems to me pretty obvious that this might not even have been a decision from ABC, much less ABC's news division. It likely came right on down from the Disney execs who were like, well, what, 15, 16 million, that's a small price to pay to stay on Trump's good side, to not kind of make us an enemy in his eyes. Despite the fact that it makes our newsroom look absurd. I mean, this should be sparking walk-offs. I think Stephanopoulos should leave personally. It's not like he wouldn't get picked up elsewhere, but so we've got this bucket of capitulation, which is just the newest entry on top of Washington Post. Just ever since the non-endorsement has been in the muck. You've got really prominent writers and editors they're leaving. They're struggling to fill
To
the
hire an editor.
executive
Yeah.
roles on top of their newsroom because nobody wants to be tied to this organization right now.
Which is stunning, because that is one of the that is what, one of a handful of, at least in journalism as we have understood it for many years, one of a literal handful of pinnacle journalistic jobs. The editor of the executive editor, the senior editorial manager of the Washington Post. That's a kind of, executive editor of the New York Times. I mean, that is, and what Kate and I are referring to here is, there. I can't remember who it was from. There was an article, maybe it was in the Journal, where basically they're reaching out to all the obvious people who could take that job, and they're all kind of like, just I'm not feeling it. They don't even want to. They don't even want to go through the process. And frankly, why would you? Right? I mean, this is it's clearly a very demoralized newsroom. It's not clear. Bezos has this one of these kind of hack types from Fleet Street, who's the publisher. That's not a good sign. Why would anybody want it? But it is. But even it's sort of, in a case like this, it's always easy for people like Kate and I to say, "Oh, why would you want to do that kind of job?" It's so people want to do lots of jobs, right? There's journalists don't always get to, beggars can't be choosers these days. So it is pretty striking that they literally don't seem to be able to get serious interest from the, I don't know, couple dozen people in the industry who are serious, who would be seen as seriously qualified for that job. It's quite a commentary.
And at the same time, you've got, the LA Times is just becoming increasingly divorced from any kind of journalistic ethic whatsoever. This mass capitulation is already kind of inspiring Trump to go further. He just announced, I think yesterday, that he's suing Ann Seltzer at the Des Moines Register because ... she put out a poll that was incorrectly favorable to Kamala Harris. Like, this is the part of him that is so vindictive. It's like hard for me to wrap my head around. It's like how he loves to relitigate the ... 2016 election, which he won because he also wants to have won the popular vote, and it bothers him that he didn't. Um, so, you've got the kind of media capitulation there, and then you've got this is being bolstered by the great CEO capitulation, which, as we've said, there's some overlap here, but this is the kind of founders, if you will, the tech guys coming out of the woodwork to pay dues, tithe, if you will,
I think of it
to...
as an initiation fee. When you join a
Yeah,
country club, you have annual dues, but then you have a initiation fee when you join the club. So those, I think of those as, it's a joining fee, an initiation fee for joining the, like joining
right.
Mar-a-Lago. You pay a bounty
And
at the beginning, and then you pay your annual dues.
and they're doing this mostly by paying for the inauguration in different ways. You had Mark Zuckerberg hand over his heart while the rendition of the national anthem sung by the January 6th prisoners was played. And then,
I hadn't heard this.
yeah, it's nice. And then just a little sprinkling atop this is you've got like Democrats kind of debasing themselves in different ways. We talked about this a little bit last week, but you've got like senators being like, well, I too want to fight agribusiness alongside RFK, or, Doge has a point. There is great waste in government. Just this kind of like bullshit pretending like these people are operating in good faith type stuff. Really, Richard Blumenthal came out of the woodwork to win the crown on this one. Like every other day, he's saying something glowing about the psychos in Trump's orbit. Like he said Elon Musk is the greatest free speech champion that we have, which is an interesting turn for him. So all of this adds up to, I think, one of the truest things Trump has said, which is, quote, in the first term, everyone was fighting me. In this term, everyone wants to be my friend. And you know what? It's true.
Yeah, I think some of those quotes we see are not maybe all they're quite cracked up to be. Although I would say, um, these are not. These are not civilians, right? These are politicians. You say things. You say things. You need to know how they might sound in certain contexts. not exactly how you meant them in the particular context with the particular inflection you had at one moment. And man, it is true that and so much of we can sort of step back and remember so much of Trump's arc. I don't want to say his origin story since he was a supervillain before he was elected, but so much of where we are is probably to his surprise, he wins the election. He thinks it is, sloppy kisses and love from here on out. I'm the president. I'm in charge. Everybody will be my friend. No one will look down at me anymore. And he's right that stuff started going wrong long before inauguration, right? He finds out there's these investigations of him. He finds out that, in fact, you are not king. There's a whole government that stays. So he feels embattled from like right from the election. He's embattled, and he gets inaugurated, and he's already embattled and kind of losing the battle from day one. And look, he's embattled because he did bad things, right? It's not some like conspiracy against him, but I do think it's worth seeing it from his mindset, right? I became homecoming queen, but everybody was throwing bananas at me. What happened, right? And it is different this time. And I don't think it will end up being very different with Democrats, although there's certainly, you can find signs of that now. But from CEOs, from corporate America, man, they all want to be friends. And that's, we're talking about the ABC thing. There was an article that one of our colleagues forwarded me this morning talking about ABC's reasoning, and they was like, "Oh, it was a Florida jury. It might have been harder than we thought." Blah blah. All these kind of like. I looked at it and like, not really. That's I don't buy that. Kind of, oh, it's going to be like Gawker or something like that. Well, not really. But the thing that when you got down into the article, they're Disney. They don't want to be a resistance entertainment company. You know, they do superhero movies and stuff, and I guess they don't do Mickey Mouse really anymore, but they do the current version of Mickey Mouse, and they don't want to be on Trump's shit list. And this article made explicit what you were rightly surmising. This decision didn't get made at ABC News. Of course it didn't get made at ABC News. This is a corporate decision because this is a big $200 billion corporation. What it said in this article was that Iger himself, they didn't have a board meeting about it, but Iger signed off on it. And of course he did. Look, this is the bigger thing here. Think about like Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos runs Amazon, which is like a walking advertisement for antitrust enforcement, right? It's like a ridiculous level of monopolistic behavior, and Trump is 100% on board with using antitrust enforcement when it works for him. That's what he did to AT&T and CNN back in round one. And there were legitimate reasons to do that on the merits on antitrust. But people should never get, a lot of people who are very policy focused get really dumb in situations like that. Well, God, I know he's doing it to sort of crush CNN, but I'm glad he's at least doing the right thing on antitrust. Well, don't be a fucking idiot, right? But Trump is smart, so he knows that it's a wide open shot. He can bring a mountain of shit down on Amazon in ways that people would not really be able to say what the problem is. There's a lot of antitrust problems. Amazon is also a huge government contractor. And so what this all comes down to me is that it is absurd to think in this kind of climate, in the Trump era that you can have the big news organizations owned by big diversified corporations, because the news organizations are not profit centers. Usually it's the opposite. They cause tons of problems for the, for the company. So we really need, everybody hates the Times for a lot of good reasons, but the Times is not the Times is basically owned and controlled by a family that their whole deal is the Times, right? They're not I'm sure they've got other investments, but their deal is the Times, right? And you don't see the Times making I don't know, doing little tributes down to Mar-a-Lago, or sending a big check or something like that, because they don't need to. And sometimes when I make these arguments, there's always a sort of a kind of an indirect a push for TPM, but we're not the only publication not owned by a big corporation. But this is just a wake-up call. In this era, it is really unrealistic to think that a big corporation is going to say, well, this news organization is actually loses money for us, and it's 1.5% of our company, but yeah, we're going to get in big fights with the federal government over the news organization. That's not realistic.
And also, corporations are responsive to the political environment that they're in. I mean, they don't have the luxury to go full MAGA, right? Like, I think that's been a lot of what's underlying some of these arguments that, well, the people who head up these companies are super rich anyway, and their personal interests align with the Republican Party and with Trump, and that's how you get here. And it's not that simple. Like,
It's not.
these
It's not at
corporations
all.
know that blue cities are the economic drivers of this country, and that you need to not full scale piss off people who are liberals, or liberals in the widest sense of the word, who like live in these places. And that's why when the political environment was very different, around 2020, you had corporations doing like George Floyd statements, and this is why they kind of started doing DEI stuff in the first place, and the green stuff, and Me Too awareness, and all of that is not because they were like morally swayed by those arguments. It's because that was kind of the tenor of the day, and they realized that they had to at least appear to be playing ball with that stuff so as not to like alienate consumers, right? The environment is really different now. I mean, what are we describing but a Democratic Party and greater the left is licking its wounds. The fight has temporarily gone out of it. I think and I hope that this is just, we're still only like a month out from the election, and people need to kind of recover a little bit. But there's no risk that kind of doing this pay to play stuff with Trump at this particular moment is going to incur some giant backlash, because people, I think, are so cynical right now, and I think people on the left are feeling like, well, this is what people want, right? So kind of let them have it. Um, just this to say that there's been some commentary around this that's like, well, this is kind of the natural division of power, and this makes sense, and this was inevitable. I think it's more of an ephemeral state than it may seem right now. And I think a lot of it is also rooted in the idea that a lot of these people are like, well, after this he's done, right? So what's the harm of kind of tossing what is pocket change to us to just keep our heads down for the next 4 years, and then kind of recalculate at that point.
I think that's right. I think another part of the corporate equation, and I think this remains more true than people think. But in the 2020 world, 2016 world, for consumer brands, they perceived, and I think this is still largely accurate, they perceived Trumpism as essentially a rearguard action from the least dynamic, left behind parts of the society, least economically dynamic, left behind parts of society. And that is, in many ways, Trump's MAGA's self definition, right? The sort of the left behind, declining cities in the industrial Midwest and that whole kind of thing. And so all consumers are not created equal. You know, uh, uh, um, the angry white people over 60 um, vote, but they are not big consumers for consumer brands, and they are certainly not the future consumers. I think that basic take on things is still the case. Obviously, that has been the sense that um, young people are completely, alienated from Trumpism has taken a real hit and a substantive hit in this election. Um, I think it is that overall consumer economic analysis, I think, remains more true than people seem to think at the moment, because they're in the midst of, and this is why the Trump people are so big on, landslide, resounding victory, all these kind of words, that you're in a different day, that the country is sort of, the country was divided in 2016 and 2020, but now the country's kind of made a decision. It's Trump land. Well, that's factually not the case. Um, but I completely agree with you. The idea that you know Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg were always sort of, firmly aligned with capital, as is Trump. I mean, obviously they're aligned with capital. I mean, they are capital, right? But I'm talking in the sort of the left, the left discourse like that. No, they have companies, and they want a compliant and helpful federal government, and that's why they're doing uh, what they're doing. I mean, yes, do they want big tax cuts? Of course they do. But yeah, it's everybody's kind of caught in this moment. I do think that political gravity and reality does not take a permanent holiday. It can take an extended vacation, but not forever.
So we're going to wrap up by talking about these big pardons and clemency grants that Biden just announced. About 1,500 people given clemency, a much smaller number, I think around 39 were given pardons. The people given clemency, it seems to have just been kind of a mass move to clear the ledger for people who were already serving out the rest of their sentences at home. This was part of the kind of clearing of jail stuff under Trump. And
And
you
under
know,
COVID,
right,
to be complete,
right.
yeah.
And what was the funniest about this was there were, a sizable segment of people on the left who, and this is online, liberal bubbles, whatever, who were furious at some of the people who received clemency here. This includes, this like shitty judge who did this Cash for Kids thing where he helped fill up for-profit prisons with, basically young Black children, whether or not they deserved it. Like a comptroller, one of those kind of jobs who stole $1 bajillion from a city. Like these kind of people who, especially the Cash for Kids one, I think is a microcosm of the kind of cruelty and unfairness of the penal system in general. And so from that vantage point, I understand why these like lefties would be upset, but it's kind of like, guys, you got to decide where you're coming down on this. Like, do you
People
want
in prison have generally done bad things.
exactly? And so is your stance that the only people who kind of deserve mercy are those whose crimes or maybe upbringings kind of align with your political sympathies in the world. Like, these people were already at home, right? This isn't the greatest injustice had already passed them by. And like, yeah, you can say it's really unfair that all the people who got sprung from prison during COVID were like white collar criminals, basically. And you know how that
But
is a
that's
different
also in the
class of
nature of
people.
yeah,
But when you're
it's
saying nonviolent crime, that's what you're
that's who
talking
it is.
about.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And even things that are, nonviolent crime, uh, there are people who maybe didn't commit specific acts of violence, but they're involved in violent enterprises. They count as violent. So yes, I mean, my take on this is that the one case with the judge, that is that case is so egregious and horrifying, and I wish they would have. My understanding of what
Googled
they
him,
did it.
Googled his name, just
Well,
have a couple staffers run down the list and
yes.
just double check what they're in there for.
Well, I think my understanding of this is they basically did it as a class. So just to bring people back to what we're talking about here, during COVID, they're trying to thin out jail populations for obvious reasons. They're like, the jails are COVID incubators basically, and they're taking some people who are in for nonviolent offense, say, hey, you put on an ankle bracelet, we're sending you home. You have to be there for the next 5 years, something like that. That's how we got to this class. So they took the people in that class. They say, okay, who has not, who's abided by their home confinement? They've already done at least a year. That came to be something like 1,500 people. They say, okay, you guys are done. So as a class, they weren't evaluating these people individually. 1,500 people is a lot of people to go through, but hey, no one made you be president, right? I mean, you should have Googled them, because this one guy, and I don't know, a few of the kids killed themselves. I mean, basically a judge who was taking bribes on the side to take kids who would not have been in some sort of, these aren't jails exactly, juvenile confinement things. It's so horrific. And we expect so much of judges. That is a case where I would say, you know what, just make an exception. It's not only is it going to be a black eye when it comes out that this guy, he was basically at the end of his sentence anyway. But again, it's so unique, both optically and really. You make an exception. But to your point, people are in jail. They did bad things. I mean, this does, uh, uh, yeah. Which side? Think this one through. Which side of this question are you on? These people have done bad things. They've stolen money. They've hurt people.
And Biden has already kind of cleared some of the low hanging fruit away with all of his marijuana stuff, right? Which that was targeted directly at what I think these people who kind of fancy themselves as prison abolitionists are envisioning, right? People who got caught up in the penal system because, they're poor or black or from the wrong neighborhood, and that
Well, just
became
like,
their life, whether or not they
yeah,
deserved it to be.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, the reality is not every story is going to be that clear cut. And you've got to decide, do you want mass mercy, the kind that a president can fire hose out at the end of his term? Or do you want something slow, deliberative, really carefully vetted, where you end up getting a dozen people who are very, very highly deserving and have really like kind of turned their lives around in big ostentatious ways? Like, is that what you want? Because I agree with you. I think the political hit on the cash for kids guy was like avoidable. Just have a few staffers Google everyone and at least just see what they're in there for crime wise and make sure you're okay with that headline.
yeah.
But I also, the other side of the coin for me is there's a reason why presidents like don't really exercise the pardon and clemency powers that
Exactly.
much.
100%.
And that's because
100%.
it's inevitable that if you do a great amount of people, there are going to be some unsympathetic stories in there, or some people who don't quote unquote kind of deserve that mercy who received it. And to me, when you've got someone like Biden who is just, his career's over, I'm not totally confident what he's doing right now, other than feeling like really, really angry towards people he considered his friends, like, which on
Yeah.
a personal level I get, but I don't have a ton of confidence that he's spending his final days kind of shoring up the government against Trump to the extent that he can. He's certainly not communicating about that if he is. And maybe it comes down to the fact that he can't communicate it, which has been kind of the nut of our problems these past few years. But I have been saying this, the theme of my statements this whole episode is I would prefer boldness that backfires rather than caution that goes unnoticed. And I think in this case, I would take the hard stance that I'm willing to kind of take the Cash for Kids guy, as loathsome as I find that situation, if it means that a ton of people are on the receiving end of mercy that they otherwise wouldn't get. And so I think you take the black eye, it doesn't matter, he's not running again, and I think you aggressively free people who are in jail right now, not the already relatively privileged ones who are home, and
Right.
this brings up what I think is a really tough question of like, what do you do about death row? I think a lot of people who are calling on him to clear it are doing so with great moral urgency because Trump is going to kill these people. And so it really is life or death. But, it's the same thing as here. It's not politically easy, right? The headlines are then going to be
They're not
Biden
freedom
used the
fighters.
sentence of mass shooters, of famous killers who murdered people in a synagogue and in a grocery store, right? Some of the most horrible stories in a country where we get mass shooting stories every single day. But uh, that's my whole thing with Democrats in general is there is a privilege in being so thoroughly out of power, and it
Mhm.
should be that when you get to exercise it, you do so boldly because your political risks are much lower than they would be otherwise. Like, who cares what Biden's approval level is right now? I mean, and so I think this was a good step. I think he should take it on the chin that lefties are pissed about this, because guess what, lefties are not ever going to love him anyway. And I think just do more. And that's what he said in this statement. They're considering it, that they're looking to give more people, quote unquote, second chances. And I really hope he does, and I hope he does it in a way that gets people out of jail, that makes meaningful change in people's lives.
I completely agree with that, and I would say, I mean, again, if you were doing it over, I would say make an exception with that one guy, because again, it's there's something kind of unique about that. But I if you rewind a week and you say like, okay, it's no 1,500 or that guy, make a choice, do the 1,500. Who cares? And because the other part of this is, everybody we are, and as you say, it's exactly the reason why we have so little pardoning, right? Because of this, oh, this person did bad things. Even with this judge guy, as I understand it, he was, I don't know, maybe sentenced to 17 years, and with good behavior that would be down to 14 or 15, and he's done 12. So like he's at the end, he's at the end of his term. What we forget here is that, okay, maybe you're taking a couple years off. The person's already been living in a box for a decade. Enduring that is unimaginable. And you've got people who are sentenced when they're kids to spend the rest of their lives in prison. This the I As much as this is a politicized thing now, I think most people don't really think through how unbelievably horrifying any significant period of incarceration is. And we do that because certain people, society needs to be protected from them because they kill people, they rape people, they do horrible things. But it's this idea that you're kind of living on easy street because you got a couple years off your 15-year sentence is crazy. And again, it's to your point, not everybody is in prison because of their terrible upbringing or because they did something that we can all agree is fine. Lots of people are there because they did things that are really destructive and are totally against the law. And so, yeah, if you want a lot of mercy, think about what mercy is when we think about it, even in a theological context. It's something you don't deserve. That's why it's mercy, right? So I couldn't agree more. I hope, and the fact that Biden is over politically just makes it even easier. So yeah, just open up you know, break open the mercy hydrant on your block, Joe Biden, and just let it flow for lots and lots of people. And if you're doing that, yeah, commute the murders. And yeah, those murders are absolutely horrible people. And maybe in some sense of justice, they should have been killed the moment they did their killing spree. But right now, 30 years later, that's just not how we do things. And there's reasons why the death penalty is wrong. And so yeah, do it all. That's my take.
Which you would also think would, you know, we've been hampered by Biden's Catholicism on the abortion issue for a long time. And you would think that the beneficial part of it would be the anti-death penalty stuff. So it'd be cool to see that side of the equation present itself a little more here.
Yeah, yeah,
Also,
totally.
I just want to add what we're saying on the death penalty thing. I see the political quandary. If I was a president, I don't know that I would want my legacy tied up with people who have done the most unspeakably evil things. But we're also not saying spring them, put them back on the streets. Like, we're saying that, as you say, the unfathomable horror of being locked in a cage for the rest of your life, it seems to me to be kind of a fitting punishment for that degree of evil.
And I would imagine that these guys are not like, they're not at Club Fed, right? These guys are probably in like solitary 23 hours a day or something. So yeah, it's not like it's just not being executed is all it is. But yeah, mercy it up.
And on that note,
Yeah, well, it's obviously this is, as I said, this is the last regular episode of the calendar year. We're going to have another episode focused on the Golden Dukes. It's going to come out something like I can't remember if it's December 30th or 31st, but kind of last day of the year kind of thing. We'll obviously be back with the new year. I think it is kind of appropriate that there was a mix of cathartic and downbeat sort of theme in this episode, but it's closing out a pretty tough year in a lot of ways. So we apologize if we bummed you out a little bit, but it's kind of I think it is fitting in a lot of ways. And you know what? New Year's coming up, new year, new beginning, and with the new year, remember, we have our first live edition of the podcast coming up on January 15th. So we're going to come right out of the gate. We're going to do this right down on DC when everybody's, Trump's going to be down there thinking he runs a show. We're going to show up in his new backyard and do a live version of the podcast. We hope you'll join us. Again, January 15th. Tickets are on sale now. If you're not a member, they're $70 a seat. And just go to talkingpointsmemo.com. You'll see a link where you can buy one. If you are a member, you get a discount. They're $50. Every member got an email from us on Tuesday of this week with a link to get your discounted ticket. So we hope you join us. It will be a lot of fun. And I think that is it for
just a
the
couple things.
one more thing. Yes,
One,
other things.
we wanted to thank Snapstream for
Yes.
sponsoring, doing our little corporate shilling. But seriously, like it all ties into the fact that we are independent and not the beneficiary of these big, corporate or overlords. So Snapstream sponsorship is really important to kind of helping us do this event. I was going to say, if you were bummed out by this episode, the Dukes episode will be more fun. And
Yeah.
this live episode, I think, will also have a sense of kind of camaraderie and catharsis that I think might feel really good if you're feeling Deflategate as well right now. And the other thing I was going to add is that just because of the calendar this year, you've got Christmas and New Year's landing on Wednesdays, our usual recording day. So we'll be back to regularly scheduled episodes after about a 2-week break. So, don't panic if you don't see us there on New Year's Day. We'll be back the following week, and then have the exciting live edition the week after that.
Yes, it's all coming. It's all coming very soon, and I'm glad you reminded me about Snapstream's sponsorship, because we really appreciate their support for this live event, and I have been using we have been using as a company Snapstream for like 15 years, and it's a great service that I have personally used forever. So we're really excited that they're working with us on this event on January 15th. And I think that is all for this episode. Yeah.
All for this episode.
All
Hopefully we'll
right.
see you all in person soon.
All right. Talk to you then.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.